Adams.
Here.
Bartlett. Cook. Hopkins.
Here.
Odenettle.
Here.
Scott.
Here.
Swanson. Womanowski. Aaron Williams.
Here.
Tony Williams.
Here.
Here. Mayor.
Here.
Item number 1, City Attorney's report.
Thank you. A couple of items. One, we have on the agenda the approval of the collective bargaining agreement with Local 499. Completed those negotiations. It went pretty well. The big item was the switching to a 12-hour work schedule. That's going to be done on a trial basis. As far as the length of the contract, it's 4 years. Salary, 2% the first year, 2.25% second and third years, 2.5% in the fourth year. No additional pension contribution. Other than that, there's a few little tweaks without other major provisions of the contract. Looks to be pretty good. Any questions on that one? And if not, second item, discuss making minutes of certain closed sessions, City Council available for public inspection. Again, we are required to, I'm required to review closed session minutes, and if we feel that it's not necessary to keep them closed, then we're able to release those open to the public for review. We traditionally do not open much in the way of litigation. We have not opened past collective bargaining because that can always come back into the future to address it. Anytime any of you want to look at the closed session minutes, they're down in the city clerk's office, and it will be set apart what we've approved for opening, what is still set to be closed. We're supposed to do this periodically. We're a little bit late this time. It's supposed to be every 6 months. We're about 9 months down the road, but we haven't had that many executive sessions. So again, that's that routine item, and if any of you do want to take a look at the minutes, if you have any questions after that, give me a call and I can kind of deal with it.
That was the list that goes back to 88.
Yes, it was. That's all I have, Mr.
Very
Mayor.
good. Let's go down to planning and public works real quick, if that's okay. Alderman Scott, we can get that one before we listen to Adam.
Oh, ouch, man.
Everybody's still awake.
Full of favorites there.
You're a gentleman. Thank you. Somebody must be more expensive than I am. Quicker, just quicker. We had the bid opening for the motor fuel tank maintenance on the 31st. I had one bidder, Illinois Road Contractors here in Jacksonville. Bid was $175,638.84. That includes a couple of non-MFT items, which is the oil and ship for Diamond Grove, which they take care of, but we included in the bid. If they have any questions? Will be scheduled, should be done before school starts.
Great.
Should we want to run that a little longer?
No, that's,
That's it? Okay, all right.
sorry.
And they are working on Michigan, right?
I was just going
All
to
right.
say,
I knew.
We've made an adequate mess of Michigan.
Yeah, that's nice one down there.
You know, it's
All
gotta
the
get
neighbors-
worse before it gets better.
all the neighbors want to know is when you're going to open up Hardman, Michigan, so we can get through it.
Probably about a week. We're getting closer.
But hey, we're not complaining, we're grateful for what's to come.
It was open Sunday.
Portions of it.
Oh.
Can I quote you on that?
What's that? No, not at all.
Thank you.
Very good. Next up, city clerk report.
Well, we, every year we have the annual audit, and Adam Withy with Zumbahlen, Eyth, Surratt, Foote Flynn is here to tell you all about the pieces of paper you have in front of you. You have the floor, Mr. Withy.
Excellent. All right, everybody's favorite meeting of the year, I know. You got two reports, one that's entirely too thick and one that's not. We're gonna look at the thick one. Believe it or not, only the first 3 or 4 pages are my job. The remainder of it is all city information. So the whole reason I'm here is this on the opinion letter on the front 3 pages after the index here. And essentially it takes 3 pages to say that everything behind those pages is materially correct and accurate based on the audits that we conducted. The information can be relied on, as being materially correct. On page 3, there actually is the last paragraph of this letter talks about the smaller report that you've got that we're required to provide in terms of the federal single audit, because the city expended more than $750,000 of federal funds. So basically this says that report should be read in conjunction with this report. But long story short, in the smaller report of the federal audit, that's where we would disclose any findings, any internal control issues, any compliance issues where the money was not spent as it should have been or budgeted for, such as may be the case, but there are no findings in that report either. So basically, the audit is a clean audit from our standpoint. If you go to page 4, I usually kind of skip over this or go pretty quick at least, because this is the statement of net position that gives all your debt, all your capital assets, a lot of stuff that governments don't really worry about so much, and this report was new back in like 2006, 2005, somewhere in there. But there are a couple of things to notice here. This is where your net pension liability will show up, about halfway down the page 4. Right above total liabilities, you've got a net pension liability, which includes fire, police, IMRF, of about $37 million, which is, of course, a rather large number, but it is by no means unique to the city of Jacksonville. This is obviously a state of Illinois issue, a local issue. Everybody sees big numbers when it comes to this, and that's why we're now required to show it. This was not in the report as of less than 5 years ago, I don't believe. It's kind of come to the forefront. And because of the fact that we have to book this pension liability on this form, you go all the way down to the bottom. In the first column, you show a negative unrestricted net position, essentially because the pension is so high that it causes you to look like you're in the negative on fund balance, net position, whatever you want to call it. But again, it's all just kind of the way it shows up on paper. Nothing's different than it used to be.
Adam, that doesn't affect any bonding we might want to do with it.
No, matter of fact, I'd be surprised if the bonding agents even paid much attention to this, because it is kind of it's an oddity for governments, and that this doesn't tell you profitability, it doesn't say cash flow, it doesn't tell you anything. It's more like a company's balance sheet, which just doesn't really apply as well in the governmental sector.
In your term there, I'm just curious, what is unrestricted supposed to mean then?
So everything above that is restricted for some purpose. The only fund that can show an unrestricted positive fund balance is the general fund, because the general fund is what it sounds like. It's in general nature. You can use that money for essentially any purpose. All the dollars above that are contained in our special revenue fund, where that money is set aside to be used for what that special revenue fund accounts for. Page 6. This is more in line with what you're probably going to care about here. This is kind of your balance sheet again, but it doesn't show the pension liability. It doesn't show long-term debt. It doesn't show capital assets. This is kind of the older version of what you're used to here. First column is general fund. One of the things we always look at is our cash balance and how much kind of reserve we've got. And usually we do an adjustment for property tax. I say this every year, but we've already collected the property tax in 2018 that is meant to fund expenditures of 2019. So included in that $12.8 million cash balance is about 4.2 in the general fund of property tax collected in June and September, somewhere in there, that are meant to fund future expenditures. So if you back that out, you're at about 8.6 million, which is about a 7.5 month reserve, almost exactly the same as it was the last, I believe, 2 years. Something to note here, and I know we talked about this during the audit, but just to bring it up again, there's
an other receivables line item here in general fund that's about $700,000. Some of that is getting kind of stale and old, and we talked about kind of going back and taking a look at that to see what is still collectible or not. Fines, fees, things that have been hanging out there for a while. So it wasn't a big enough difference in our audit for us to adjust for it, but it's something we probably want to take a look at going forward.
Do we have an idea what that is?
I believe the clerk's office has a listing of what makes that up, yes. And correct me if I'm wrong, Skip, but I believe that's true. The next column over is the capital improvement fund. Just something to point out, included in the $1.4 million in cash, there is a cash balance that has some video gaming tax money in it. It's about $481,000. So that money has definitely flowed into the city and helped in a number of ways. Obviously, there's a number of parlors in town now, so that, I believe the funds for that go into the general fund, but we've transferred some of that over to capital improvements to fund those projects. Good news, about halfway down the page in the capital improvement fund, there's a accounts payable for $347,000. That number has been on the books for 2 or 3 years, if not longer, except when it was on the books, it was there for about $440,000. It was an estimate of what the state of Illinois was going to bill us for the downtown work that they paid a big portion of up front, and they bill us for our share. And that number came in, about 90 grand less than what we were expecting. So I believe that has been paid at this point, but as of December 31st, it was still alive.
Correct.
So again, that's the downtown project that the state can take years to close these things up, but we have to do our best to come up with what that number is gonna be. That might be the first time accountants ever said anything funny. Page 8. This is the revenue and expense of the 2 major funds, general fund, capital improvement, and then the third column is just every other fund of the city that's kind of conglomerated all together. Some things to note here, the intergovernmental line item of $7.2 million in the general fund. I didn't note how much that was up. It was a few $100,000. Sales and use tax was up this year, and we had some grant income that came in that is included in the smaller booklet there. I believe it was to help pay some salaries for was it firemen that we were getting reimbursed for, I believe. So intergovernmental, that's where that would show up, as it's coming from the federal government to help fund operations of the city. The first line item there, taxes, is up about 1.35%. That includes both property tax and the local sales tax. So the $6.3 million roughly is up slightly, 1.35% from the prior year. Scroll down just a little further, investment income is not a huge number by itself, $288,000, but it's about 125% better than the prior year. I believe we had more money invested in CDs and such. I believe when some banks changed hands here in town, there was a bump in some rates that made a big difference.
We negotiated with primarily CNB, which is our main bank, interest rates for checking accounts. That was done by the remnants of Jacksonville Savings Bank in a way of an apology, I think, for some of the other things that CNB was throwing at us. But they threw some incredible checking account rates at us, 2.27 currently, interest rate on checking accounts and the CDs. This year, unless the Fed lowers the Fed funds rate dramatically, excluding fire and police pension, we'll get between $500,000 and $600,000 in interest on checking accounts and CDs.
Good work.
Staying in the general fund, let's see, total revenue within the general fund's up about $667,000 or 4.6%. Expenditures are up about $476,000 or 3.75%. So expenditures did remain under the revenue increase. And then even further down below, you can see transfers. There's always a pretty good sized number here between the first two columns. General fund transferring money to capital improvement fund to help pay for acquisitions or construction projects, whatever the case may be. All in all, across the government, so the far right-hand column, total governmental funds, total revenues down about $500,000, but total expenditures are down about $433,000. And some of that, as much as I was touting the investment income, if you look at the third column, investment income is actually negative, because that actually includes some investment type stocks, bonds, things like that the fourth quarter of 2018 kind of got a little rough in the stock market. So you see a negative number there, which has a lot to do with why that $500,000 income is down. Page 10. This is the balance sheet or statement of net position for the proprietary funds, water, sewer, golf. Kind of one big overarching theme of water and sewer this year is that they were essentially wrapping up the building of the new water treatment plant. It is online. The loan had to begin repayment status. So that affects a number of things that you're going to see here if we were to do a comparison. Cash is up about $1 million, and as I stated last year, that's been done kind of by design from the days that we knew we were going to have to build this water treatment plant, because essentially rates went up, water and sewer rates went up to allow some padding so that when that loan or bond payment had to start being made, we had the funds available there to do it, as opposed to waiting and then hitting the citizens with an enormous water sewer rate increase all at once. And it has seemingly worked out pretty well. Along those same lines, property, plant, and equipment is up by another $2.7 million this year. Again, that's just the finalization of the plant. And similarly, bonds payable, both current and long-term, have been adjusted to take into account the fact that the big loan, now the big bond for the new water treatment, is starting to be repaid. Something to note here, and you'll see it on the next page, so I guess we might as well go there. Page 11. All the way down towards the bottom of the first column, you've got capital contributions, the $3 million figure. That is loan forgiveness essentially from the EPA, and almost like a grant essentially, where they say, we loaned you these dollars to build the water treatment plant, but you don't have to pay back this $3 million. So a nice bump there for sure, without any additional work. Let's see. Water sewer revenue up about 3%. Most of which I believe was on the sewer side, and then some of that was actually a refund from one of the other city funds that paid for lake reclamation, I believe, and water sewer water sewer paid for it and was reimbursed by one of the city funds. Some of the expenses look a little weird this year too, but for good reason. Heat, light, and power went up by about a third, I think, because there was a time there where we were running both water treatment plants as the new one was starting up and the old one was kind of winding down. Depreciation expense is way up because the new water treatment plant had to begin depreciating. Everybody's favorite, golf. Revenue is down about 22,000. Expenditures are up about 24. So our net income or loss is actually down about 46. I'm not a farmer's almanac kind of guy. I don't remember what the weather was like in 2018 compared to 2017, if that could have something to do with the play, or if there's something bigger at work there. But A lot of people are better at remembering that than I am.
So the one line, 49,000, we lost 49,000 more than last year, or is that just a difference?
That is the difference after the transfers from, I believe, general fund and capital projects. So the income or loss before those transfers was 198 roughly. We're gonna go to page 14. This is the fiduciary net position for the pension trust fund, which is the police and the fire. This is the total of both. Further back in the book, almost at the very end, I believe, there's a breakdown of how much belongs to which. But the total assets is actually down. You got 33.6 million, down about 2.4 million from 2017 figures, and which puts almost right in line with where we were at the end of 16. Again, the stock market plays a huge factor in maybe I shouldn't say stock market, the market plays a huge factor in where we end up here as of a specific day, December 31st.
So with that, where are we? I mean,
Well,
are we holding even keel? Are we, I'm not really sure what you meant.
well, what I mean is, if you were to do this exact same report today with new actuarial figures, new market information, these numbers could be entirely different. It's a snapshot of such big numbers that are market driven and assumption driven that the actuaries have a job that they have to do, and that is to make assumptions and try to make those assumptions smooth over a number of years. But you're always gonna have pretty big fluctuations, especially if the market is doing what it's done the last couple of years. Now, and if you don't mind, let me get on that a little bit more as I go through. What this statement does not reflect is the total pension the net pension liability of the city. That liability is a liability of the city, and this is the pension itself. Does that make sense? So the pension is not obligated to pay anybody, the city is, and these are the monies that are being held to pay those people. So that's why that liability showed up on those first couple of pages we looked at, and it doesn't show up here. Next page. Total contributions up at the top. Employer contributions, which is essentially the property tax replacement tax that gets put into the pension trust funds, and the employee contributions, which are the withholdings essentially on their behalf, are up about $94,000 from 2017, which is about a 4% increase. So in terms of what we can do to stay at that even keel that you questioned, the city is doing what they can. They're putting in more than is required, and I'll show you that. Actually, if you want to see that really quick, you can go to page 76 and 77, just to kind of hammer it while we're here. And this is, you'll see that it's a recurring theme. Page 76 is the police pension fund. The fourth column is the contribution deficiency or excess that has been put into the fund. And you can see over the 4 years that I've got available here, since this report has been required, the city has overfunded the pensions by, let's see, 300, 500, almost $700,000 over that 4 year period. So again, in terms of what we can control, the city has control in two ways. They can, what they fund into the pension itself and who their investment advisors are. And that's about it. Then it's kind of up to relying on those professionals and the market to do its work to hopefully we've hired the right people and we're doing the right things to keep it on that.
Okay.
But the excess contributions are catch-up contributions, aren't they?
I don't know that it's necessarily catch-up, no, it's, the city is given an amount that they're required to put in by, Skip, help me out here if I'm.
Department of Insurance.
Okay, sorry, wrong. Department of Insurance says you have to put in at least this much, and that's usually taken care of through the property tax levy. And that levy is sufficient enough to put in that much plus these additional. And I believe a lot of that has to do with the fact that the replacement tax is going in there as well, if I'm not mistaken.
If you note, and I pointed this out a couple of times in the past, on the actual levy itself, it states something to the effect, and I'll misquote it, I'm sure, but the amount required, that you're required to contribute is the amount that's actuarially figured, plus an additional amount to bring you to full funding by 2040. So the state is building in addition to what it actually is. In other words, they're telling you gotta put in extra, you're not gonna make it by 2040.
So what you're saying, that addition is built into their number and we're doing an
Yes,
addition to
and we're
their-
doing the addition to that.
So how much percentage is fully funded?
How much what?
Yeah, how much funded by 2040?
I think it's 90%.
So 90% is fully funded.
90 or 80, I'm not sure, Steve. Now, there's a Senate bill right now that's gonna change that real quick.
And then you use regular business, goals, like 100% funded by a different date, right, when you do yours?
Well, we don't do it. The actuaries, essentially, the actuaries get a copy of the financial statements that the city and us provide, and then they run all their figures, which, believe me, I'm no actuary and don't want to be. I don't like numbers that much, and I'm an accountant. Honestly, if you'd almost have to read the 80 pages, or the 40 pages that are in the middle of this report to know exactly what they're trying to, when they're trying to get it funded by, what assumptions they're making, what rate of return they're looking for on different types of investments, things like that. I don't know if it says, to be honest, when they expect to be fully funded based on their assumptions. I would have to read that myself. Okay, so we've already kind of hammered it, but I have to do it again. The net investment income, the second section of that page 15, is actually showing a negative net investment income. Interest and dividends and realized gains and losses on sales of investments are both actually up. But the holdings of the pension that had not been liquidated, the market value had dropped, because essentially this is a mark-to-market accounting where you say, you know, it's on the books for this much, but as of today, this one day, it's worth this much trading on the market. You have to adjust it to that number. So it's possible, I mean, if you look at it today, it might be an absolutely different figure. That's kind of the insanity of the pension accounting. I understand everybody's concerns, but again, you do what you can to get to where you need to be or want to be, and hope that on the one day that this is gonna get looked at and be published, the market's doing well.
They couldn't have looked at at the end of the fourth quarter was when the stock market just, I'm sure your 401k showed too. I can't tell you how much, but the first quarter of this year, it's coming back, or it has come back. And that's what Adam's saying, depends on when you look at these numbers. I mean, they can, do what you can, like Adam said.
Essentially, the $1.56 million negative net investment income, I believe last year we showed a positive 3-something million. It's like a $5.38 million difference, which again is because of this appreciation or depreciation in held assets. So again, hopefully the market comes back up and this looks much prettier by 12/31/19. The deductions down below, benefit payments, administrative expenses are almost exactly the same amount they were the prior year. I think they're different by like $6,000, so, that's not an issue. Page 40, and a lot of what I'm skipping here is the first couple of notes to the financials are static from year to year. They're just the required things that have to be in here, so that's very repetitive. So page 40 is the police pension fund, and gives you the income and expenses of the fund up in the top. It gives you the net change, so you can see the total pension liability increased by $853,000. The fiduciary net position decreased by about 1.1 million. So the liability is up by about 1.9. And you can see kind of where these items come from. And then down below, kind of what we're talking about, actuaries have to make a lot of assumptions. And if those assumptions come true, they're no longer assumptions, they're facts, but we don't know that till after the fact. So they have to show here what kind of difference it would make if you got a 1% better or 1% worse rate of return on your money than what they're assuming. The assumptions are what drive this net pension liability that we've got. But if you had a 1% better rate of return on your investments, your pension liability for police would drop by, what, $4.5 million. Or if you got 1% worse, it'd go up by about $5.5 million. So you can see how much these swings in the market or changes in assumptions can make a big difference on what number ends up in this report. Page 49 is essentially the mirror image for the fire pension. Just to kind of point out both. Again, about a $3.5 million difference if you had a 1% better rate of return, or a $4.4 million difference to the negative if you've got a 1% less rate of return. Page 58. This just points out real quick, I believe we talked about this with Skip's office during the audit, but just to mention it, there's a $197,000 inter-fund loan where, let's see, the motor fuel tax fund owes some money over to capital improvements because a couple of years ago, I think capital improvement shored up. So, but that number was unchanged, I believe, from last year. So
that's an in-house number that needs to be moved around, that hasn't been taken care of for a couple of years?
So what happened, I believe it happened last year, and it was in last year's audit. But what happened, I believe, is capital improvements paid, I believe it was a North Main project bill that was a motor fuel tax earmark expenditure, I guess. So we just need to basically move that money from motor fuel tax to capital improvements.
That's already been taken care of, so next year it shouldn't appear here?
It shouldn't, no. Like I said, I know we talked to the office when we were doing the audit, and I believe it was a non-issue, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Page 60, there's really nothing exciting here. I just always like to point out that this is the debt schedule for the city. And as you can see, it's big numbers down below for water and sewer, but up top for the governmental activities, there really is no debt, which is something the city should definitely be proud of in terms of, you know, we haven't had to go out and issue general obligation bonds or anything like that. Expenditures are handled in-house. Page 68. This is just the detail of the general funds that we already looked at in the front. This just gives you more information here. You can see the revenue was better than budget on the right hand, about halfway down the page, by a little over $500,000. A big chunk of that being investment income was to the good for $206,000. Telecommunications tax was $100,000 better than expected, and video gaming tax was not specified in the revenue portion of the general fund budget, so the full amount, 292, appears to be better than budgeted because it wasn't specified.
And the reason for that is that we don't want that money into the general fund, you want it in the capital improvement fund, so it stays in a special account that the council controls. So it's not in the general fund and then go to the general fund debts.
And like I said earlier, that's that checking account, I believe, in the capital improvement fund where that money gets moved over.
Yeah.
Same thing down below, expenditures were better than budget by almost $800,000. And we were better than our budgeted profit, if you will, by about 1.3 as a result. Page 76 is, I believe, the pension page we already looked at, showing the excess contributions. So let's go to 81. And I think this will tell some of you what you're really looking for here. This shows from 2015 going forward. So again, when the rules for these pensions were changed as far as how they had to be reported in the audit, was 2015. So that's why that only goes back that far. Eventually, you'll have a 10-year schedule here to give you a really good history, but it's built prospectively. So 3/4 of the way down the page, you've got net pension liability or asset. So you can see it goes from 19.8 to 19.5, all the way down to 17.4 last year, and then back up to 19.3 this year. So if you look at that, you can kind of quickly tell that 2017 was a little bit of an anomaly with the way the assets performed, because 15, 16, and 18, that net pension liability is being chipped away at by a few $100,000 a year. But 17, it went down by, $2 million. And again, if the market was doing really well on that particular day, that would explain that. But you can see right below that line item, you've got percentage of funding. And it's steadily getting better on the police side. You go 43, 45, again, the anomaly of 50%, and then back up to from 45 to 46 over 16 to 18. So it's on the right trend. I can't think of the mathematical term for what you call the anomaly, but essentially something that doesn't fit into that normal trend. On the next page, you got the same information for fire pension. And it's not exactly the same as police, in that the percentage of funding goes 50, 54, 58, and then back down to slightly less than 54. So at the end of 18, we're roughly where we were at the end of 16. And same goes for the net pension liability, in that it's similar with where it was at the end of 16. And it'll be interesting to see once we have the full 10-year schedule how this trend continues. If it's aligned like the stock market, or if we're steadily getting better. And just from the little bit that I've got, it looks like we're going to be steadily getting better. I guess that's just what the next number of pages is the detail of that one column of all the other funds of the city, where they're referred to as non-major funds, because they don't hit a certain threshold as far as dollars, so they don't have to be shown separately here. If anybody has something they wanna ask about a specific fund or anything like that, I'm more than happy to answer. I didn't go through this detail again, kind of non-major. I'm not gonna hit the pensions anymore, I feel like I've bored you to death with them, but the detail of fire and police is on page 91 and 92, if you wanna see them separately. And page 93 is the tax information, levy, rate, extension, collection. The tax levy for 18 is about a 3.5% increase over 17, which I believe I recall that specific percentage being brought up. General fund only received a 2.6% increase, which tells you that of that 3.5%, a good chunk of it is earmarked for something specific and can't go to the general fund, such as the fire pension, police pension, library. That is my report, which I feel like came a very abrupt ending, but I think everybody was hoping for that anyway.
I don't know, I was kinda working my way up there and you just dropped me off.
Yeah, I know, it's cliffhanger, man.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions that they can put into words?
I do want to say that, I've been working with Zumbahlen and Eyth for 12 years, or 10 years now, and even more than that before, but they've gotten better and better and better, or faster and faster and faster, but they're easy, they find things, but we provide that information a little bit ahead of time, which helps them do their job a little bit quicker, but they are very easy to work with. My staff, when they've got questions, they come to my staff. They're very professional and they do a real good job, not a pretty good job. They do a real good job in correcting things when they see something that's wrong. I do have to commend them on a job well done. They've been doing it a long time, but they know where we are and we know where they're at. And they help us out throughout the year also, not just with the audit.
I have to coordinate between them and Waterbach and Amon, who does the Gadsby 67, 68. And they've gotten so good with Gadsby and the people at Zumbahlen that it's seamless anymore. It just Suzanne and Sarah and Justin, they just handle it, it's
Well,
seamless.
and I will say this year, I think we made fewer journal entries this year than we made in a number of years. Skip mentioned when we find something wrong, but there wasn't a whole lot of that this year, and so I think the city staff has to be commended as well.
That sounds like you're working pretty well together. I mean, this isn't just an annual thing, you're almost in the daily routine of the city, aren't you?
Not quite daily, but it's a phone call enough, yeah.
Somebody has to check on Skip.
Sure.
Vice versa too, trust me. No, they do a really good job and I appreciate everything. When they come in, I think I remember the first year that I had it, it was nerve-wracking because you don't know where the stuff is that they're going to need, and I depended upon the staff, and now I know where most of that is, and they can go to the staff and get it, or they can come to me and get it and get questions answered, so we've got a pretty good relationship. They do a good job. Thank you.
We definitely value it too, I promise.
Questions for Adam?
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Good job.
All right.
Yeah, it was as clear as I can understand accounting.
Just let everyone know, he doesn't dress like this all the time.
Okay.
City meetings and bank board meetings, that's it. Hey, I do have the data collection form for the single audit, federal audit information, and the state comptroller's report. I've still gotta get to you, but they're basically down, I just didn't want to submit them until after.
No problem.
So,
Yep.
we'll be in touch.
And tip.
Yes, I'll be
Tip
in touch.
letter. You got your tip letter.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
You got your tip letter, didn't you? Okay.
Good job.
Thank you.
Hold to the read.
Any public comment at this time?
Full audit.
Okay, we'll adjourn and.